Okay, I wasn't paying attention to the time in the previous one. This is part 2 of memory. Well, I was talking about acoustic encoding and Billy Joel's song "We Didn't Light the Fire," and also encouraging you to try some rap songs in terms of remembering. You'll really work a lot better at remembering things. Okay, so let's take a look at, looked at sensory memory, working memory. Let's take a look at long-term memory. And what's cool about this is it's limitless and relatively permanent. We have mental categories where we store information that are basically unlimited in capacity and duration. There's several different components for long-term memory. There's procedural memory and then declarative memory. Procedural memory is real easy. You can get on a bike and ride a bike no matter how long it's been since you rode it in the past. As procedural memory, you know how to drive. You don't have to think about it. You just do it. Declarative memory includes two different components: semantic and episodic. Again, episodic memory is relatively easy to deal with. It's simply remembering personal experiences of the past. You can remember more and more of them the longer you stay with it and try. Semantic memory is where most of us have the greater difficulty, because that's language, facts, general knowledge, concepts, and those things we need a little bit of help to keep in long-term memory. One of the things that helps long-term memory is what's called the level of processing. In other words, things that are more meaningful to you personally are things that you're going to remember better. You can see that with the graph here, which shows you that letters, which are fairly random and not connected, are more difficult to remember than rhymes, and rhymes are much easier. And then finally is something that has strong meaning to us. That is something that we're going to hold in our long-term memory much better. There was a handout that I do in class. I don't really have that right now. I can try to put that up so that you'll have that as something to take a look at, and I'll try to remember to do that. Okay, so encoding. Again, it's rehearsal, but there's a couple of characteristics about rehearsal that are important for us to remember. If you followed along and did things in the PowerPoint like I suggested, then you would have written down the gifts from the song "The 12 Days of Christmas." And there's a forgetting curve that we encounter in any time we try to remember information. So if these are the 12 gifts, and on the vertical axis would be the number of people in the class, then our forgetting curve is not showing up here very well. But you can see it here, where it starts out and it peaks, and then it drops steadily down and levels out here. I don't know why it's not showing up. But what this shows us is something important, that when there's a difference or some kind of meaning, like 5 golden rings is repeated a number of times in a whole different tone, we tend to remember that in a group of terms. We start off remembering better at the beginning, and it tapers off to the end. So it would be important if you were learning, let's say, 20 vocab words, that you broke it apart, number one, to make the chunks easier. And then you would tend to remember the first one better than the last one. And if you could make it somewhat elaborative, any of the terms, that would help you to remember that a little bit better. This is a video. Clive Waring was a workman who lost his ability to form long-term memory. So everything was literally in his short-term or working memory. That's a kind of a cool video to take a look at. He was injured while working, and you can see the impact of not having any ability to move information into long-term. Oh, there's the graph. Perfect. Okay, so a typical class, and over time this hasn't changed much, would look just like this. If you were recalling the 12 days of Christmas. What that shows you is the serial position effect. So if you were to write down as many, the serial position effect is that we remember things better at the beginning of a series than we do at the end. Important information. If you were to write down as many presidents, then we would come up with a chart similar to this. In other words, this is Rosenthal's forgetting chart. It shows us that, as you saw with the 12 days, you tend to remember more at the beginning of a list. You have asymptote in different parts because you may have, like with 5 golden rings, really notice that. And also, we tend to remember things at the end of a list. So here's a good YouTube video to check out that shows you the impact of this. And what's important for us is to know that if we have a list of 20 vocabs, better to break it down into 5 and do 5 at a time, because you tend to remember the beginning, the end, and then if you can make one of the vocab words asymptote, in other words, elaborative rehearsal, then you'll have a better chance of remembering that. So there's that YouTube, which is kind of interesting. You might enjoy. So take a picture of that and then check it out a little bit later. Okay, another aspect of long-term memory that's important to remember is that we have a schema. We have a representation of the world based on our experiences and who we are, and that schema impacts what we take in and also what we process. So if we were to do this, what I would do is read a list of words to you, ask you to then write down as many as you remembered. And I'm not obviously going to do that, but here are the words that I would have read to you and then asked you to write down. When it was all said and done, I would ask you how many of you wrote down aardvark. And all of you would look at me like, what the hell are you talking about? And then I would say, okay, forget that. That's not good. How about, how many of you wrote down sleep? And frankly, about 60% of you would have written down the word sleep, because I created a schema that was analogous to the schema that you hold in your head for sleep. And sleep includes all of these different terms. So you would have hallucinated hearing the word sleep and written it down. Because schemas determine for us what it is that we think of when we have a bunch of data points. Oops, sorry, there's 2. Okay. During class, I do a activity where we get a couple of volunteers, and what we do is put them in the hall, and then I tell a story to everybody in the class, and then as I call in one volunteer at a time, we try to, what was that called? A game called Telephone when we were kids, or Pass the Message or something. And what we will notice as they pass the message from one to another is that we tend to level out. We tend to eliminate unnecessary information to us uniquely. We tend to sharpen or exaggerate details that are important to us, and then we fit what we've been told into a pre-existing schema, and therefore the story we tell to each volunteer. The first one comes in, goes through these steps, and then the second person that comes in gets told that story, and they do these steps, and then the third person that comes back into the classroom gets told a story that's way different than the initial story. This would have been the story that I would have read, and you can see that there's a lot of details in here that would get quickly eliminated from person to person, depending on their schema. What we might notice is that a male would tend to remember a .357 Magnum, would tend to remember hurling the microphone at the hijacker, because those are typical male traits, things that are important to them. All of us would have probably reversed who the pilot was and who the stewardess was, because we tend to think of pilots as male, stewardess as female, and therefore, or flight attendant as female, and we would have reversed that. So there would have been a whole different story from the original one. Okay, so let's take a look at the biological basis of memory. Interestingly, we've learned a lot about memory from damage and from animals. Works on rats have provided us with good ideas of what damaged areas end up impacting. We also are aware of neurotransmitters and that they fire based on different experiences that people have. And what we have learned is that increasing or decreasing some of these neurotransmitters will have an impact on memory itself. Long-term potentiation, that's the process of our neurons releasing neurotransmitters and impacting adjacent neurons. You remember that, I'm sure. So that long-term potentiation means that we can block memory utilizing drugs or electroconvulsive therapy, whereby we are disrupting that long-term potentiation and changing, therefore, memory. Or hopefully what we're learning is how to improve our memory. You're probably quite aware of stress and its impact on memory. You know that there are some scenes in your life that are literally like pictures. You just remember them. For many people, maybe for your age, 9/11 is a flashbulb memory. You can remember where you were, what you were seeing, how it felt. I literally have several. I have a flashbulb memory of the assassination of JFK. I can tell you that I was on third grade. I was in the far left corner of the playground at an elementary school playing kickball, and I can remember seeing the teacher stick her head out the window and yell, President Kennedy's been shot. So that flashbulb memory is kind of ingrained in my hippocampus and my cerebellum. And these are two brain parts that you'll remember we talked about in the past that are primarily responsible for memory. What's interesting is that biologically, memory is all over the place. We have different aspects of the brain that are impacted when neurotransmission takes place and we put things into long-term memory. So it would be good for you to know these, but especially the hippocampus, the amygdala, and the cerebellum. So you might take a picture of that. Okay, so memory isn't accurate all the time. Sometimes it is, sometimes not. Like flashbulb memory is pretty damn accurate. Others are not. So there are